nonsense and it was all for you. So don't take it chance. Don't leave my heart down. It's the understand that things go a little bit better.
Susanna Morales was a 16-year-old high school freshman from Norcross, Georgia, who brought brightness to the lives of everyone she encountered. With her infectious smile, kind spirit, and musical talent, Susanna distinguished herself among her peers, admired for her positivity and warmth. As the youngest of 3 siblings, she belonged to a close-knit family where secrets were scarce and support was plentiful. They cherished quality time together, whether watching movies, dining out, or simply enjoying each other's presence. Even as a freshman, Susanna was already a cheerleader and well-liked by her classmates. Her friendly demeanor and approachable nature made her a beloved figure among her peers. Yet, it wasn't just her sweet personality that won people over. Susanna also had a deep passion for music and an innate ability with instruments, mastering the piano and recently picking up the guitar and ukulele, excelling at both. She loved performing for anyone who wanted to listen, often inviting her family into her room to share her joy through music. Her love for music and natural talent could make even the most mundane moments feel magical. On Tuesday, July 26, 2022, the Morales family went about their usual routine. It was the middle of the summer break, and Susanna was relishing in her well-deserved time off from school, using the time to recharge her batteries. Eager to make the most of her time off and earn some extra cash in the process, Susanna joined her mother at work for the day, eager to learn and gain some valuable life experience. As mother and daughter tackled the day's tasks side by side, enjoying the time they got to spend together, they were unaware of the significance of the day and the horrors which would unfold just a few hours later. Susanna and her mom arrived home at around 4 p.m. that afternoon. After freshening up, having supper, and lounging around for a while, she asked her mom at 6 p.m. if it was okay to visit one of her closest friends who lived about half a mile away, and her mom gave her the go-ahead. It was just a short 10-minute walk to her friend's flat at the Sterling Glen Apartments, and it was a journey Susanna had made plenty of times before. So shortly after 6 p.m., she said goodbye to her mom and made the journey to her friend's place. She arrived there about 10 minutes later, and as usual was the case, she texted her mom immediately to let her know that she arrived safely. The 2 girls spent the next few hours chatting, laughing, and enjoying each other's company, and time basically flew by. Before they even realized it, it was now well past 9:30, and Susanna knew that she needed to make her way back home. She once again texted her mom, this time at 9:40 p.m., to let her know that she was about to embark on her journey back home and promised to see her in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Susanna's mom, who was still awake at the time, waited up as usual for her daughter to be safely in bed before she'd go to sleep. But as the minutes passed without the sound of Susanna walking through the front door, her mom began to feel a sense of unease. It's been over 15 minutes since the text from Susanna, yet she wasn't home yet, and her mom immediately sensed that something wasn't right. Her mom waited anxiously as the clock ticked away, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Her heart sank with every minute that passed without a sign or word from her daughter. Minutes had turned into hours, and without warning, it was now already the next morning, and still no word from Susanna. Her family was unable to get hold of her, her phone going straight to voicemail, and it seemed that no one had seen or heard from her. So that very morning, her mom went to the police station to report Susanna missing. When the Morales family approached the police to report Susanna missing, they never could have anticipated the level of resistance they'd face from the very people tasked with protecting their community. The officer on duty callously told them to wait 48 hours before reporting her disappearance, dismissing their fears and concerns as nothing more than typical teenage behavior, claiming that teenage girls often ran off with their partners or stayed out late at parties. But Susanna's family knew better. She hadn't taken any personal belongings with her, not even a change of clothes, and it was completely out of character for her not to let her family know where she was. Despite this, the police continued to treat her case as that of a runaway, even as her family adamantly insisted that a crime had been committed. The police were even reluctant to release a statement on Susanna's disappearance or to reach out to the community to request that they keep an eye out for the missing 16-year-old girl. This only added to the mounting sense of frustration and desperation felt by the Morales family, who knew that they couldn't depend on the police and that it was up to them to spread the word and find Susanna. They designed and distributed their own flyers, hoping that someone in the community would be able to offer some much-needed assistance. Their persistence finally paid off when a local business in the area stepped forward with security camera footage. The footage showed Susanna walking home just after 10 p.m., mere moments before she was expected to arrive home. What was interesting to the Morales family was that this business was located less than a minute's walk from their home, making it clear that Susanna had been on her way back home, just as she'd indicated in her last text message. It was evident to the Morales family that something must have happened to Susanna between the time she passed the store and the 1 minute it would have taken her to get home. The family also managed to track Susanna's last known movements via a GPS app on her phone. The data showed that Susanna had been walking down Singleton Road between 10:07 and 10:21 p.m., headed in the direction of her home on Windscape Village Lane. But then something strange happened. Her phone pinged again at 10:26 p.m. near Oak Lock Trace, which was in the opposite direction of her home, nearly a mile away from her last known location. The family immediately brought this information to the police, who reluctantly acknowledged that it was probable that Susanna had gotten into a vehicle around 10:21 and traveled in the direction of Oak Lock Trace. But even with this mounting evidence of foul play, the police were still hesitant to officially declare Susanna a missing person. The family did their best to keep Susanna's story alive and to continue putting pressure on the police, so they approached various news agencies hoping to shed light on Susanna's case and keep her in the public eye. Through their tireless efforts and the power of social media, Susanna's story gained momentum, putting pressure on the police to take action. The pressure eventually became too much for the police to ignore, and on August 29, 2022, a month after Susanna's disappearance, they finally released a press statement officially declaring her a missing person. The Morales family's persistence had paid off, but they knew that the road ahead would be long and uncertain, and that a lot of valuable time was lost in trying to find Susanna. But they continued to hope that the case would move forward from here. Unfortunately, the case wouldn't move as fast as they had hoped, and it would take 6 months before police would reach out to them again. This time, they approached the family and requested a DNA sample from her mother, as well as dental records for Susanna. This was a strange request for the Morales family, as it seemed to confirm their worst fears that police weren't searching for a missing person, but in fact, they were searching for a body. Their fears would eventually turn into reality on February 6, 2023, nearly 7 months after her disappearance, when the body of Susanna Morales was discovered in a wooded area between Drowning Creek and Barrow County. Medical examinations would confirm that she died between 10 p.m. on July 26th, the day she disappeared, and 2 a.m. on July 27th. Upon further investigations of the scene, only a few feet from her body, officers discovered a handgun. Although it was clear that Susanna wasn't shot, police were certain that the handgun had something to do with the case, so they collected it as evidence and traced the serial number of the gun. And what they would eventually discover would shock the community of Norcross to its core. The gun was traced back to 22-year-old Doraville police officer Miles Bryant. This was a shock to the police officers who realized that they needed to investigate one of their own. When they took a closer look at Bryant, they discovered that he had reported his gun stolen just 2 hours after the Morales family had reported Susanna missing. In this report, he said that he accidentally left his truck door unlocked, and that's how someone was able to get inside his truck and steal his weapon, his military ID, and his wallet. Police also noticed that Miles lived in the same apartment complex where Susanna's friend was staying and where she was last seen the previous evening. The evidence was starting to mount up. So on February 13th, 1 week after Susanna's body was discovered, police arrested Miles Bryant. He was charged with concealing the death of Susanna Morales, as well as for the false reporting of a crime. The warrant alleged that Bryant dumped Morales' naked body in the woods between Drowning Creek and Barrow County, and that he had previously given a false report that his personal car had been broken into and a gun taken from inside the vehicle. Police also stated that they didn't believe that Susanna Morales knew Miles Bryant. After his arrest, it would also emerge that Miles Bryant had a history of stalking and harassing behavior and that he had previous maladministration charges against him. Despite the police previously being made aware of these allegations, minimal action was taken against Bryant. In 2022, around the same time as when Susanna went missing, a woman approached the Doraville police station complaining that she was being stalked by Bryant and that he had tried to break into her home. She said that she had known Bryant since the 5th grade, but their paths separated when they got older. Bryant tried to reconnect with her, and after chatting for a while, the lady decided that they didn't have much in common and distanced herself from him. After this, Bryant became aggressive and started to stalk and harass her. She felt that she was being watched, and someone even tried to break into her house, breaking the panel on her door. She also approached a neighbor who had a security camera, and after reviewing the footage, she saw a person who she believed to be Bryant trying to break into her home. Although he was trying to hide his identity, one frame caught him looking directly at the camera. Bryant's behavior was so aggressive and so intimidating that the lady actually feared for her life, and she ended up getting a firearm to protect herself. She reported his behavior to the Doraville Police Department, but nothing was really done about it, and the department only gave him a stern talking to. Bryant was also accused in 2018 of trying to break into a neighbor's house by entering through a window. The neighbor actually called the police, but when they arrived, Bryant denied that he ever tried to break in. After a bit of back and forth, the neighbor decided not to press charges, and no further action was taken. In October 2022, another allegation emerged against Bryant, leading to departmental charges for maladministration. A family had reported their child missing, and Bryant was responsible for creating the report. He took 3 days to complete it, despite federal law mandating that it be finished within 2 hours. During those 3 days, there was no record of the child being reported missing, resulting in Bryant being written up. It remains unclear if the missing child was ever located. On February 23, 2023, Miles Bryant appeared in court and learned that his charges had been upgraded. He was now also facing charges of murder and kidnapping related to Susanna Morales. His lawyers indicated their intent to file for his release on bond, with the bond hearing scheduled for May 1, 2023. Additionally, the Doraville Police Department recently announced that Miles Bryant has been terminated from the force. Kajetan Poznański, a Polish cannibal whose obsession with cannibalism led him to gruesome crimes. Kajetan is an exceptionally intelligent individual. He completed degrees in journalism and classical philology. Known for his aptitude for languages, he speaks at least 4 fluently. University professors who have interacted with Kajetan believe he possesses remarkable potential. His innate talents, combined with diligent effort, have yielded outstanding results. Clearly, he exceeds the average person's intelligence quotient. He has a highly adaptable mind and can discuss a wide range of subjects. Although Kajetan hails from Poznan, he pursued his studies in Warsaw, where he also began his professional career. Before completing his bachelor's degree, he behaved like an average student. He used to party a lot and spend time with his friends. However, after completing his bachelor's degree, the boy changed dramatically. He became very slow and began to dress like a lecturer rather than a student. His interests became more academic. He no longer went to evening parties. He preferred to sit in his room and expand his knowledge. This appealed to his female colleagues. They saw in him a mature and responsible man. It is hardly surprising to them. Keaton really seemed composed and focused on his goals. He had all the qualities of an academic lecturer. He often led workshops where he passionately tried to pass on knowledge to his students. As a male trainee, he worked, among others, in the popular Polish weekly Polityka or a Polish news agency. He also published his essays in the yearbook. Thanks to his studies, he had acquaintances in the journalistic community. Already during his internship, he became extremely interested in cannibalism. Most of the proposed articles he presented were specifically about eating creatures of his species. However, these texts were written in an exceptionally thoughtful and intelligent way, so everyone thought that Keaton was theorizing about such brutal practices, and his views were purely scientific. However, the topics he presented were too controversial, which is why none of the newspapers published these articles. In terms of linguistic richness and style, Keaton produced excellent texts. However, he was not lucky, and after completing his internship, he failed to get a job in the journalism industry. Instead, he got a job at a library. It is not hard to guess that his skills allowed him to get a much better paid job. And despite the fact that the work of a librarian was not his dream, for that moment he had to be content with such a place of work. He lived modestly, as his earnings were not high. He was definitely not used to such a modest life. As a child he lacked nothing, as he came from a wealthy family. His mother is a lawyer, and his father runs a large company. However, there were likely arguments between Keaton and his parents until they stopped contacting each other. So the man had to cope on his own. Of course, from his current salary, he could not afford to buy an apartment or a house, so he lived in Warsaw, in the Zalabaz district, with 2 flatmates. Earlier, as a student, he shared an apartment with a person who remembered him well. This person claims that at first glance Keaton seemed to be an extremely cultured and well-read. It was impossible to get bored with him. He passionately talked about his interests. On closer acquaintance, however, one could see various eccentricities in the man, quite unusual for today's times. He had many different interests, including herbalism and mysticism. Keaton loved nature very much and hated city life. In his room, he collected samurai katanas and animal bones. He often received guests by candlelight, while music with the voices of natives from the Keaton is also a very pedantic person. Apparently, even a delicate mess could drive him crazy. Everything had to be in its place. On the subject of order, there were no compromises for him. Because of the mess, he was even able to beat up his flatmate. Fortunately, the fight never happened, because knowing today's facts, it could have ended badly for the tenant. How did this terrible story begin? Let's start from the beginning. It was a winter day. On February 3rd, 2016, the firefighting unit received a report that puffs of smoke were coming out of one of the apartments on Pataka Street. Firefighters immediately rushed to the site. The fire was not large and managed to quickly extinguish it. However, the truth about the fire turned out to be terrifying. After extinguishing the apartment, firefighters discovered a large bag of smoke, and in it there was an overburnt human body. The body had no head. In the second room, they found a backpack with the rest of the body, more specifically, the victim's head. The police were notified, who determined that the fire was an inept attempt to hide traces of the murder. Officers determined who lives in the apartment. Turned out that 3 men lived there. 2 of them appeared for questioning. It quickly became clear that they had nothing to do with the arson, as they had an alibi. However, the 2 men turned their attention to a third housemate, who was known to them for his eccentric behavior. He was Keaton. The investigators failed to make any contact with him. They suspected that the man had fled abroad. His phone did not answer, and the man vanished into thin air. The murdered woman turned out to be 30-year-old Katarzyna J. She was a former Italian teacher. She earned a living teaching in language schools and tutoring. The woman graduated from Applied Linguistics and the Academy of Fine Arts. She came from Radom. She was ambitious and linguistically gifted. She loved physical activity, including trips to the mountains or the lake. She enjoyed learning languages and especially loved the Italian language. Among other things, she worked as a researcher of the history of Radom and contributed to a magazine called Radom Humanistic Studies. She eventually chose to work as a teacher. The police established the victim's identity fairly quickly, as the person sharing the apartment with her quickly reported her missing. When her flatmate arrived at the apartment, the door to the house was open and the computer was on. Besides, there were brown marks on the floor. In the washing machine, officers found bloody towels with which the perpetrator had wiped the floor clean of blood. An autopsy showed that the woman had been killed with a knife, then chopped up with a saw and packed in a bag and backpack. Circumstantial evidence indicated that the perpetrator of the crime was Kajetan. European arrest warrant and an Interpol red note were issued for the 27-year-old man. This was intended to alert other countries to how dangerous the perpetrator might be. It was established that Keaton took a 15,000 zloty loan from a bank shortly after the murder. This confirmed to investigators that the perpetrator was planning to flee the country. There was little chance that he was still in Warsaw. Police were aware that the man would try to disguise himself so that no one would recognize him. they managed to get to the surveillance video of one of the Warsaw stores. It was there that the man bought a khaki-colored jacket with fur at the hood. How was he remembered by the saleswoman? During the transaction at the cash register, Kajetan argued with her over 1 gross, which is basically like 1 cent in US, which is why he sank into her memory. A taxi driver who recognized him on TV also reported him. He testified that Kajetan was carrying a bag in his taxi, which was leaking blood. Naturally, the driver was very disturbed by this sight. He sensed that it could be a human body. However, Kajetan reassured the driver, saying that he was only transporting a dead boar. At this stage of the investigation, it was clear that it was the body of a woman. Thanks to video surveillance, the route of the perpetrator was established. Police officers knew that the suspect had set off from Warsaw to Poznan. From Poznan, he immediately left for Berlin, then to Italian Sicily, and from there to Malta. The psychological profile of the man was very helpful in tracking down Kajetan. It was known that he was frugal, so he would not sleep in expensive hotels or travel by taxi. He was also not helped by his distinctive jacket, which was very conspicuous. Investigators deliberately did not release his clothing to the media, as they realized that Kajetan could follow the news and buy another one. Police had been treading on the pursuer's heels for days. Officers were getting closer and closer to the suspect. They learned that in Malta, the man had visited a travel agency because he wanted to get to Tunisia. He also wanted to report the theft of his passport, hoping to cross the border. His plan was to flee to Muslim countries, where he would be virtually elusive. However, he failed to get permission to cross the border, and that's when he realized he had a serious problem. On February 17, 2016, Kajetan was stopped when he got off the bus. He seemed very surprised. He did not resist and allowed himself to be handcuffed. After a few days, his extradition to Poland was carried out. He was transported by plane. The trip was peaceful, but at the end of the flight, when the policeman removed his handcuffs, he threw himself at one of them and started biting him like a wild animal. For this reason, a special helmet was put on him so that he would not hurt himself or other people. He was placed in custody where he was to await trial. From the very beginning, he confessed to the murder. He calmly told how it happened. On that day, he left work early in the morning and then took the tram to Katarzyna's apartment. He had been planning the murder for a long time. He thought about how to commit the perfect crime. After some time, he decided that it would be a good idea to kill the tutor. In case of an attack on the tutor, he had the opportunity to be alone with the victim. One evening, while browsing ads on the internet, he picked out a 30-year-old woman. He did so only because the woman in the ad did not include her photo. The man preferred not to know who he would kill. Upon reaching Katarzyna's house, Kajetan took advantage of the fact that she was very when she offered him tea and turned her back to him. He immediately stabbed her twice with a knife. He dismembered her body with a saw, then put her in a bag, and placed her head in a backpack so that he could transport the corpse. To confuse the trail, the killer used 2 taxis. During the ride in the first, everything went smoothly, but in the second taxi, blood started leaking from the bag. However, he managed to convince the driver that he was transporting a dead animal. He then transported the corpse to his rented apartment, which he set on fire to cover his tracks. Kajetan admitted that he had intended to eat his victim, but didn't have enough time to do so. He claimed that he had planned to become a serial killer. The murder was part of his self-improvement plan. For some time, he had been doing intense physical exercises, as well as starving himself. The murder was to complete his transformation and make him strong, which is why criminologists do not understand his behavior after the crime. He could have hidden the body much better. So why did he set fire to his own apartment? It was obvious that he would draw attention to himself by doing so. This behavior seems to be very illogical for such an intelligent man. Why did he do this? Perhaps the commission of the crime overwhelmed him? Perhaps the murder was not as simple as he assumed? On July 17, 2017, Kajetan was charged with murder with particular cruelty. While in custody, he attacked the expert psychologist who examined his case. The first opinion of the expert psychiatrist stated that the defendant was insane, while in the second opinion the experts testified that Kajetan had some disorders, but he was lucid and knew perfectly well what he was doing. After several months, the indictment file was returned to the investigators, as the court decided that the key evidence needed to convict the man was missing. In May 2018, Keaton's trial began. Due to the defendant's poor health, it was held behind closed doors. Even the closing speeches were delivered, but the court did not issue a verdict. The trial was resumed, as it turned out that new important evidence had come in. A lot of time passed, and the verdict of the court was still not forthcoming. Meanwhile, Keaton was in the Lodz Penitentiary in the forensic psychiatry ward. He was constantly monitored by the prison service. The guards testified that, according to them, he was simulating mental illness. They believe that when Keaton knows he is being watched, he behaves like a madman. In everyday life, however, he is calm, and in his cell he reads books and exercises. He leads a similar lifestyle to that of a free man. He is also reportedly aggressive and vulgar. There are disciplinary punishments against him. He has the status of a dangerous prisoner, as he is unpredictable. Keaton eats his meals with plastic cutlery, and the furniture in his cell is fixed to the floor. On January 26, 2021, the verdict in the case of the murder of Katarzyna Jai was finally announced. The defendant himself did not appear in court. Keaton was sentenced to life imprisonment and will serve his sentence in the therapeutic system, that is, he will be sent to the prison where there is a psychiatric ward. He will attend therapy there, and in addition he will pay 150,000 zlotys in compensation to the parents of the victim. 75,000 to each of them. The verdict was not final, so an appeal could be expected. The man will still be held responsible for the attack on the psychologist. In 2023, the Court of Appeals in Warsaw upheld the verdict of the Court of First Instance and sentenced Keaton Poznański to life imprisonment. In a recent appeal verdict, the Court of Appeals in Warsaw altered the classification of his crime, as requested by both parties in their appeals. The court determined that at the time of the murder, Kajetan Poznański retained the ability to understand the nature of his actions but had a markedly reduced capacity to control his behavior. Have you heard of the Polish cannibal before? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Emily Parker was born and grew up in the serene town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Parker, were esteemed members of the community. Richard ran a local hardware store, while and worked as a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother named Jack and a younger sister named Sarah, was cherished by her parents. From a young age, Emily showed a great enthusiasm for life. She was an outstanding student, excelling academically and engaging in a variety of extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching developed during high school, influenced by a history teacher who vividly brought the past to life. Emily followed her aspiration by attending Ohio State University, where she obtained a degree in education. After graduation, Emily returned to Maplewood and landed a teaching role at the local elementary school, where her commitment to her students was unmatched. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year, David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. Grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort. Their bungalow, perched on the edge of a secluded, the first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic, soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story, while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming, but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague who requested anonymity mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds' double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs. Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate, but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches. Although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove, Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became a champion for domestic abuse victims, sharing her experience to aid others in similar circumstances. Although the media's interest in her life eventually diminished, Emily continued to embody resilience and survival. Detective Hayes regarded the case as one of the toughest of his career, navigating through layers of deceit and human vulnerability that unveiled the dark intricacies of love, trust, and betrayal. While the resolution was not entirely fulfilling, it provided some measure of justice and closure for those impacted. Ultimately, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance served as a stark reminder that reality can be more bizarre than fiction, and that beneath seemingly flawless lives, there can be a tangled web of secrets waiting to be discovered. It was August 11th, 2008, Monday. Sarah Widmer, 24, was at home with her husband, 27-year-old Ryan Widmer. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist at a practice in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, while Ryan was a sports planner. That evening, they both went directly home after work to have dinner together. Sarah and Ryan met through mutual friends and went on a blind date at a pub. They became inseparable, bought a house, and got married. Having been married for just 4 months, they were still very much newlyweds and were planning their future. For their honeymoon, they had gone to Costa Rica and were now planning a vacation to Cancun. But the most exciting plan was in relation to a new puppy. They were in the process of buying one together. That night, the night of August 11th, Ryan and Sarah had some leftover hamburgers, corn on the cob, and cheesy potatoes and watched a bit of TV. According to Ryan, they watched a few of Sarah's favorite shows before she let him switch over to a football game. Sarah then decided to take a bath in the bathroom in the master bedroom, and Ryan recalled her asking him to check the doors before he came upstairs. He remembered her walking upstairs after they both said, "I love you." She walks on her tippy toes as she often did. At 10:49 p.m. that night, Ryan called 911. The call lasted 7 minutes. He told the 911 dispatcher that his wife had fallen asleep in the bathtub at their home in Morrow, Ohio. Ryan told the dispatcher, "My wife, she fell asleep in the bathtub, I think. I was downstairs. I just came up here and she was laying face down in the bathtub." Ryan said that he was downstairs watching TV, and when he went upstairs he found Sarah in the bathtub laying face down. He told the dispatcher that she falls asleep in the tub all the time. The dispatcher told him to take Sarah out of the bathtub and talked him through how to do CPR. Ryan put the phone down as he emptied the bathtub and lifted Sarah from the bathtub. Took around 29 seconds. Ryan attempted CPR. Police were at his house within 6 minutes of him making the 911 call. They found Sarah lying naked in their bedroom. She was on the floor. Police noticed that her body was warm and dry, but her hair was wet. They tried CPR and noticed that a pinkish-white frothy discharge was coming out of Sarah's mouth and nose, signs that she had drowned. When the paramedics arrived, they made 2 attempts to intubate Sarah while in the bedroom. Both attempts were unsuccessful. They brought Sarah out into the ambulance and again tried to intubate her twice more. They spent 10 minutes working on her inside the ambulance before bringing her to hospital. Ryan went with her. There was a 5th intubation attempt which was unsuccessful. The 6th one was successful. It was made when she arrived at the hospital by the treating emergency room physician. But it was too late. That same night, Sarah was pronounced dead. Police spoke to Ryan at the hospital. Ryan told police that he was home alone that night with Sarah. Ryan said that he was watching a football game on TV downstairs and Sarah was taking a bath. It was 10 p.m. He told police he had been afraid she may fall asleep in the tub. Police asked him if Sarah had fallen asleep in the bathtub before. Ryan said no, but he said that Sarah would fall asleep in unusual places. Even though Ryan told police that he found Sarah in the bathtub and he believed she fell asleep, police were not so sure. They were suspicious when they had arrived at the house to find Sarah's body dry but her hair wet. They also believed there were inconsistencies in his story. He told the 911 dispatcher that he found Sarah in the bathtub laying face down, but they believe he told the nurse at the hospital that he found her laying face up. When police searched the Widmer's house, they observed that the bathroom floor, mat in the bathroom, and the towel on the floor were dry. The bathtub itself was mostly dry except for a few droplets around the drain. When they looked around the house, they found no wet towels. Police found what they believed were further inconsistencies in Ryan's account as to what happened that night. Ryan had told police that he was watching a football match, a Cincinnati Bengals football game, on the TV downstairs when Sarah went to take a bath. But the TV downstairs wasn't set on that channel when they checked. The TV in the bedroom was set to that channel. Police found bloodstains on the carpet in the bedroom. Sarah had been lying on the floor in the bedroom when police arrived. Dr. Russell Updegrove, the Warren County coroner, performed Sarah's autopsy. He determined that Sarah's death was caused by drowning. There was faint bruising on the right side of Sarah's forehead and a tetral hemorrhage on the inner surface of her eyelid, bruising on the left side of her neck, a contusion on the back of her neck, and a brassyon on her left armpit, and bruising and lacerations to her upper lip. Sarah had deep muscle hemorrhaging in the interior of her neck and contusions to her scalp. He determined that the manner of Sarah's death was a homicide. It was his opinion that the injuries Sarah sustained occurred before her death and were not consistent with injuries commonly resulting from CPR. Toxicology reports revealed there were no drugs or alcohol found in her system. On August 13, 2008, just 2 days after Sarah's death, Ryan was arrested on a charge of aggravated murder. It was the prosecution's case that Sarah died as a result of drowning. It was their case that the cause of Sarah's death was not so much as dispute, but the manner in which she died was, how did she drown? The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the scene, and Sarah's injuries were all enough to prove that Ryan killed her. He held her forcibly underwater, drowning her in the bathtub. Police dused the bath tube for fingerprint and found streak marks believed to have been made by human hands. The marks were located near the middle of the bath tube. Using a supergluey fuming process and reflective ultraviolet imaging, finger marks and smear marks were observed on the bathtub. A forearm impression was found on the bathtub, and the testing presence of hair follicles determined the impression was made by an adult male. But it could not be determined when it was made. Furthermore, the prosecution argued that there was nothing wet inside the bathroom. If Sarah had drowned and Ryan pulled her out of the bathtub, the floor should have been wet along with other items in the bathroom. They also alerted the jury to the fact that when police arrived, just minutes after Ryan called 911, Sarah's body was dry. They made reference to the 911 call, and it was their case that Ryan had said too much. He told the dispatcher what he had been doing that night. He was orchestrating the 911 call. The prosecution told the jury that there had been a violent confrontation in the Widmer home that night for reasons that were unknown. They called an expert to testify that it was virtually impossible to fall asleep and drown in the bathtub unless drugs and/or alcohol was involved. It was their testimony that the sensation of water on a face would wake the person up, or the gag reflex entering the airways would. If that didn't happen, then the drop in oxygen would cause the person to wake up. The prosecution called Coroner Updegrove, who carried out Sarah's autopsy, to give evidence about what he believed happened to Sarah that night. He testified that for Sarah to have a dry body and wet hair, one likely explanation would be that her head was pushed over the edge of the bathtub or toilet or sink. It may have been pushed either forwards or backwards, either in running water or full water. It was the prosecution's case that Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, and on that basis, he should be found guilty of her murder. It was the defense's case that there was no evidence to suggest that Ryan killed Sarah. They argued they were very much in love. There was no motive whatsoever for Ryan to kill Sarah. People who knew Ryan had never seen him get angry or raise his voice. Their friends believed they were happy together and making plans for the future. The defense had their own autopsy conducted. On August 15, 2008, 2 days after the initial autopsy was carried out, a second autopsy was performed by Dr. Werner Spitz. Dr. Spitz was retained by the defense. He agreed that the cause of Sarah's death was drowning, but in his opinion, he would have ruled her death as undetermined. Sarah's co-workers gave evidence and testified that she would sleep in her car before starting work in the mornings and go out to her car to sleep during her lunch break. They also testified that she had allergies and suffered from headaches and stomach pains. They recalled that on at least one occasion, her headache was so bad that her vision was blurred and she needed to go to a dark room until it went. Dr. Benjamin Messmer, a dentist at the practice, testified that he was working the day Sarah died, and he said that she complained of a headache and stomachache that day. Her friends also gave evidence and told the court that Sarah would fall asleep in unusual places such as at a game or when she was in the middle of a group talking. It was so bad that one of them told her she must have narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder characterized by excessive sleepiness, sleep paralysis, hallucinations, and in some cases episodes of cataplexy, partial or total loss of muscle control, often triggered by a strong emotion such as laughter. Sarah's mother, Ruth and Stewart, testified on behalf of the prosecution. She claimed that she never witnessed anything unusual about her daughter's sleep pattern. She did notice that she got headaches but believed this was a result of her sinuses acting up and nothing more. She said she spoke to Sarah the day she died when Sarah was on her way home from work and she never mentioned that she had a headache. Ruth testified that there was no history of seizures, heart disease, or cardiac problems in the family. Sarah had a heart murmur when she was a baby and had a cleft palate. But in June 2008, Sarah underwent a physical examination and there was no mention of a heart murmur still being present in the report. There was also no mention of any cardiac ailment, neurological defect, or disease. One of the prosecution's witnesses, Jennifer Crew, gave evidence. Jennifer contacted Ryan when he was in prison after she watched an episode of Dateline that had featured Ryan's case. According to Jennifer, Ryan called her at 11:06 p.m. on October 26, 2009. Jennifer told the court that he said, "I did it. I did it. I killed Sarah. I did it." Jennifer testified that Ryan told her that he fought with Sarah in the living room of their home in relation to his cheating, drinking, smoking, and pornography habits. According to Jennifer, the argument continued upstairs and Sarah told him their marriage was over. She claimed that as a result, the argument became physical and Ryan said, "Nobody leaves me. Nobody ever leaves me. And I mean nobody." Jennifer told the court that Ryan told her he punched Sarah in the chest, which caused her to fall back and hit her head. He blacked out and when he came to, Sarah was on the floor. She wasn't breathing and her hair was wet. Jennifer claimed that Ryan only pretended to attempt CPR when on the 911 call as he knew there was no point as Sarah was dead. She continued to have calls with him after that conversation. She reported the conversation to police after his second trial ended in a mistrial. The defense tried to discredit Jennifer's testimony and presented evidence in relation to her former prescription drug addiction and convictions for misdemeanor theft. The defense argued that they could not say or give an explanation as to what caused Sarah to drown that night. Dr. Smile testified on the defense's behalf and said that nationwide, there are approximately 300,000 episodes of sudden death a year. And of those episodes of sudden death, 1 to 2% occur in young people under 35. But 1/3 of those young people that die have normal autopsies. No evidence of any cardiovascular, respiratory, or central nervous system injury. There are certain situations where people die and their autopsy may never reveal the cause. The defense urged the jury to look at all the facts surrounding the case. Ryan had no reason to hurt Sarah. Ryan was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 15 years to life as prison. One of the jurors in the third trial said that it was Ryan's behavior in court was one of the biggest reasons he found him guilty. Ryan did not react when the autopsy photos were displayed in court. It was September 2nd, 2015, Wednesday. Kendra Hatcher, 35, pulled into the parking garage at Gables Park 17. She lived there and felt secure with its 24-hour concierge service and its vibrant, luxurious amenities, including a saltwater infinity pool, a fitness studio, and a gourmet coffee bar, all in uptown Dallas, Texas. Originally from Pleasant Plains, Illinois, Kendra had studied dentistry there before moving to Dallas for work. She had recently started a job at Smile Zone, which seemed ideal for her. With a strong Christian faith, Kendra aimed to use her dental skills to benefit others. Smile Zone provided high-end dental care to children from underprivileged backgrounds. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible study and participated in volunteer programs, such as building churches abroad and offering free dental care to children in Ecuador. Kendra's professional and personal lives were flourishing. She was in a relationship with Dr. Ricardo Ricky Paniagua, who was completing a dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Although their relationship had only been a few months old, they had already talked about marriage. Kendra and Ricky had met on Tinder and had their first date on May 24th. And from that very first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values and wanted the same things in life. That evening, the 2nd September, Kendra drove into the parking garage to park her car after work. She got there at 7:42 p.m. It was something she did every day, but she was excited for the weekend ahead as she had plans to spend that Labor Day weekend in Mexico with Ricky. But Kendra would never make it to Mexico. Just minutes after she drove into the parking garage, 2 men walking through the parking garage heard the sound of screams and shots fired. After the shots were heard, a Jeep Cherokee was seen speeding out of the garage. Hashim Saad, who lived in the apartment complex, heard the screams and called 911. When police arrived, they found Kendra's body in the parking garage. She had been shot dead. The initial thought was that it was a robbery as Kendra's coach purse was missing. Bullet shards and a handgun magazine were found on the ground beside her body. But as police investigated further and examined the scene, they thought the manner of the shooting did not suggest that it was a robbery. It seemed more like an execution-style shooting. The gunshot residue found indicated that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The entry wound came from the upper part of her head and the bullet exited through her chin. But who would want to kill Kendra in an execution-style shooting? By all accounts, she was well-liked and helped anyone she could. Police obtained the security cameras at Gables Park 17. The footage showed a Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking garage at 7:15 p.m. The footage showed Kendra returning home and driving into that same garage at 7:42 p.m. The footage captured a man walking towards Kendra's car, and then that same man was captured on the footage returning to the Jeep. Police believed that that was the man who shot Kendra. The footage revealed that there was another person involved. The driver of the Jeep was a woman and she drove out of the parking garage as soon as the man got back into the Jeep. But it wasn't clear enough to be able to identify them, so police released images of the Jeep and the driver to the media and appealed to the public for help. That appeal worked. A man named Jose Luis Ortiz contacted police and told them that the Jeep was his, but that he wasn't involved in any shooting and wasn't driving it at the time of the murder. Jose told police that on the morning of September 2nd, 2 friends of his named Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez asked if they could borrow his Jeep. He said that they told him that Crystal's car was having mechanical issues and they left the car with Jose for him to work on it, and he gave them his Jeep to use in the meantime. They were supposed to drop the Jeep back to him that evening after work, but instead, Brenda asked him to meet him at a Chili's restaurant that evening and he agreed. Crystal wasn't at the restaurant and neither was his Jeep. Jose told police that he was with Brenda at the restaurant at the time the shooting took place. The Jeep was returned to Jose's house later that night. They had no idea that his Jeep would be used as a getaway car. He said that the first time he became aware of it was when he saw the appeal the police made and recognized his Jeep. He asked Brenda about it and she told him that it wasn't his Jeep, but then later said that Crystal used it to go there to get drugs for somebody and probably something went wrong. Jose told police that Brenda urged him not to say anything as it was his Jeep and that he could get in trouble with the police and risk his citizenship. He felt that she was trying to manipulate him. According to Jose, Brenda suggested that he paint the Jeep a different color and she would pay for it. After speaking to Brenda, Jose reported the matter to the police. Police spoke to Brenda and asked her about Kendra. Brenda told police that she had no idea who Kendra was and never saw her before. They asked her where she was at 7:42 p.m., the night of September 2nd, and Brenda told police that she was at a Chili's restaurant with Jose, and she showed them the receipts for the dinner. Police asked her about Jose's Jeep. According to Brenda, she gave the Jeep to Crystal. Police questioned Crystal. She was a 23-year-old single mother. They asked her if she was the woman seen on the footage driving the Jeep. She confirmed that she was. She initially told police that an armed carjacker got into the Jeep and forced her to drive to the parking garage that night. She told police her 9-year-old son was with her, but the footage showed that there was no child in the car. When police told her that, Crystal changed her story. She told police that there was no carjacking and she drove the man to the garage willingly but claimed that she thought it was just for a robbery. She insisted she knew nothing about the shooting. Police asked her why she agreed to drive there in the first place even if she did believe it was for a robbery, and she told them that Brenda asked her to do it. Police asked her why Brenda would want to steal from Kendra, and she told them that Kendra was dating Brenda's former boyfriend. It's discovered that Brenda and Ricky dated on and off from 2012 until the beginning of 2015. When they separated, he began dating Kendra and Brenda wasn't happy. But Ricky had no idea that she was unhappy. He ended the relationship in February 2015 and dated other women. When he met Kendra in May, he knew it was serious. So he sent Brenda an email out of courtesy to let her know he was in a serious relationship. He didn't tell her Kendra's name, and Brenda seemed fine and told him that she hoped they would remain friends. As the questioning continued and the evidence mounted, Crystal wanted to make a plea deal and she agreed to testify in exchange for a shorter sentence. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the murder was all her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting Brenda, they began planning Kendra's murder. Police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricky was over. She was obsessed and desperate to get him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy being friends, but her life had started to unravel. Her grades dropped and she missed work. She set about making it her full-time job almost to get Ricky back. She cyberstalked both Kendra and Ricky and hacked Ricky's email and discovered plans they were making and trips they booked. She grew to resent Kendra. She believed that Kendra had taken her place. According to Crystal, she made up her mind that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. Brenda asked Crystal if she knew anyone who could help, and Crystal agreed to help. They began making a plan to kill Kendra. They met up numerous times and devised multiple plans. The initial plan was to inject Kendra with heroin or a sedative, and then they discussed shooting her. Brenda asked Crystal if she could find someone to do it or if she knew anyone, as she was from a rundown area. They drove around and asked it a number of people if they could help. They later met a man named Christopher Love. He agreed to help and they discussed in different ways that they could kill Kendra. They made a unanimous decision that the best way to kill her would be to shoot her, as it would be fast. Crystal told police that Brenda agreed to give her $500 and she agreed to give Christopher money and drugs. Crystal told police that they chose to kill Kendra on the September 2nd as they were aware that Kendra and Ricky had plans for Labor Day weekend and would be leaving Dallas on the September 3rd to go to Mexico for a vacation. Brenda believed they had to do it before then, as she became aware that they made plans to move to San Francisco when they got back. Brenda knew about all of their plans and everything they did, as she had loaded Ricky's iPhone account onto another phone and used that to stalk him. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the killing to look like a robbery gone bad. To decide where to carry out the killing, Brenda and Crystal decided to follow Kendra to see what her movements were like on a regular and normal day for her. They followed her to work. They sat outside a Salvation Army and used binoculars to monitor her movements while she was at work. After work, they followed her back and discovered how best to gain access into the parking garage. They figured out that they could easily get inside if they parked in a visitor spot first and then followed another car into the garage. They did that same routine for a few days to ensure that nothing changed. They were confident they knew exactly what Kendra would do on the September 2nd. The three of them, Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher, did one last run through the day before on the September 1st and timed it. They stole gloves, syringes, disinfectant spray, and wipes from Kendra's workplace. The next day, September 2nd, the plan was for Crystal and Christopher to carry out the murder alone. Early that morning, Brenda and Crystal collected the Jeep from Jose and picked up Christopher at a Jack in the Box. Brenda was dropped off at a library in Carrollton, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex alone. When they got there, they waited across the street for 30 minutes or so and drove to Kendra's place of work. Crystal left to pick up her son and nephew from school and dropped them off with her grandmother. She drove back to Kendra's place of work and followed her when she left. They lost her in traffic and they got back first, so they accessed the garage and waited for her there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves and approached Kendra with the gun and shot her as she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she didn't actually see the shooting but heard it. They left, and after Crystal dropped Christopher home, she collected her son and later met Brenda at Cho's house where she dropped back his Jeep. Foot of the deal Crystal made, she would be the star witness for the prosecution. There would be 2 trials. Christopher and Brenda were charged with capital murder and their trials were heard separately. In exchange for her testimony and her guilty plea to a murder charge, Crystal was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Police found a gun hidden in a side compartment in Christopher's car. The gun was the one used to shoot Kendra. Due to that, Christopher was willing to talk. He told police that Brenda promised to pay him in both drugs and money and that he was hired by her to shoot Kendra. Christopher was found guilty and sentenced to death. Before Brenda faced trial, she went on the run for almost 7 months. She was even featured on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. She was arrested in April 2016 in Torreon, Coahuila, Mexico. Mexico agreed to extradite her, but only on the basis that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Her family and Ricky initially didn't believe that Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving woman, wholesome, and someone who had good family and Christian values. Ricky told police that when he ended the relationship with her, they remained friends, and he even sent her a text message the night Kendra was shot to let her know. She offered to help in any way she could. Brenda pleaded not guilty, and her defense argued that she wasn't even there when Kendra was shot and had an alibi and receipts to prove she was at a Chili's restaurant at the time of the murder. But it was the prosecution case that Kendra was killed as part of a murder for hire scheme orchestrated by Brenda. Brenda did not need to be there at the time of the shooting to be guilty of murder and could still be found guilty, as she planned and orchestrated the entire thing, and she was the person who hired Crystal and Christopher to carry out the murder. The court heard that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as being an obstacle to getting what she wanted. It was her desire to be back with Ricky. The court heard that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda had become increasingly obsessed with her and Ricky. Court heard testimony about that obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. Her cousin Moses Martinez testified that Brenda was depressed after her relationship with Ricky ended. He testified that she offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He declined to do so. Brenda's friend Jennifer Escobar testified that Brenda was super obsessed with and angry towards Ricky when he ended their relationship. She told the court that Brenda would read through all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda had even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer testified that Brenda asked her to eliminate Kendra Hatcher. She told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something fatal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. She told the court that Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car and drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then declined it. It was the prosecution case that Brenda asked a number of people to help her before she finally found someone to agree. It was their case that she took advantage of Crystal. Crystal was a struggling single mother who made $11 per hour, and she looked up to Brenda, a woman who had her own apartment and money, and wanted to be like her. The court heard that she gave Crystal $500, and police found the ATM withdrawal receipt for that amount in her belongings. She also paid Christopher. He was given a cash sum and $600 worth of marijuana and $300 worth of cocaine. 3 were told that Brenda was at Chili's the night Kendra was shot and went straight home afterwards. But the jurors were shown footage from a surveillance video from Jose's neighbor's house of the night of the murder. And the footage showed that Brenda was at Jose's house after Chili's, and she was there with Crystal, and they exchanged the Jeep for the car. The court heard that cell phone data also placed her with Crystal and Christopher before the murder, and that Brenda and Crystal contacted each other 99 times over a 2-week period. From the August 22nd to the September 4th, the jury deliberated for just 30 minutes and found Brenda guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It was December 16th, 2000, Saturday. Jerry Michael Mike Williams, 31, went on a duck hunting trip to Lake Seminole in Jackson County, Florida. Mike lived in Jackson County with his wife, Denise Williams. They had been high school sweethearts, married, and had an 18-month-old daughter. They had recently talked about having another baby. Mike worked as a real estate appraiser and enjoyed spending his free time on the boat. That Saturday, he told Denise he would be home in time for their vacation, which they had planned to Apalachicola, Florida, to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. When Denise didn't hear from him by noon, she reached out to a few friends to help search for him. Denise said that Mike was duck hunting alone that day. A number of people helped search for Mike down at the lake. Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester, received a call from his father who told him that Mike was missing. He went out to the lake with his father with their boat to search for Mike. The search took place over the course of a few hours and the light was gone. But in the dark, they managed to find Mike's small motorized canoe on the lake's shore. A few yards from the lake, around 75 yards, they found Mike's Ford Bronco. It looked as if it had been parked there, but there was no sign of Mike anywhere. The search continued in the days, weeks, and months that followed, and Mike's hunting license, jacket, and waders were eventually found at the bottom of Lake Seminole. As there was no sign of Mike at all, police initially believed he may have drowned, and as such, they believed that his body would float to the surface a few days later. But that didn't happen. As that particular lake had a number of alligators, they thought that there was a strong possibility that he may have been eaten by alligators. As there was no body, the case was classified as a missing person investigation and remained that way until 2010. 6 months after Mike went missing, Denise asked Leon Circuit Judge John Crusoe to declare Mike dead. He granted her application and declared him dead. Denise told friends and family that she believed he was dead. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, did not believe her son was in the lake. She believed he was alive and she fought for the investigation to be reopened and looked at again. She took matters into her own hands and uncovered different leads, tracked them down, and even cross-checked their stories. She conducted her own investigation into her son's disappearance. Cheryl's persistence paid off. In 2010, police reclassified Mike's disappearance as a suspicious death, and the case was looked at again by a team of cold case investigators. The reason the investigation was reviewed was mainly based on Cheryl's investigation and some pieces of information that had been uncovered since Mike's disappearance. Police learned that Dennis received $1 to $75 million in life insurance after Mike's disappearance. But more concerning than that was the fact that, in 2005, Dennis married Mike's best friend, Brienne Winchester. When the cold case team looked at the details of the initial investigation, there were a number of things that troubled them. When Mike's boat was recovered, its engine was off, yet the gas tank was full. The manufacturer claimed that if the engine was on when Mike fell out of the boat, which is what police believed happened, it should have remained on until the fuel was exhausted. The fact that the engine was off but the tank was full indicated that the engine was turned off. Investigators also discovered that the very fact Mike was going to the lake alone that day was unusual. He normally never hunted alone. Furthermore, his truck was parked in an area that would have required him to drag his boat through mud, which didn't make sense as there was a concrete boat ramp close by. Mike's waders, hunting jacket, and flashlight were found after Mike was reported missing at the bottom of the lake between some torn weeds and alligator excrement. But the cold case investigators, looking at the case with a new perspective, believed that they may have been planted there so that it would add weight to the theory that Mike drowned and his body was eaten by alligators. Their theory was boosted by reptile experts who told them that North Florida alligators don't feed in the winter due to the colder temperatures and wouldn't consume a full-grown man without leaving a trace. But despite suspicion that Mike's disappearance may be more sinister than was previously believed, there was no physical evidence or DNA linking anyone to Mike's disappearance. It wasn't until 2016 when everything fell into place for the police in terms of the details of the investigation. Denise and Brian had separated and Denise filed for divorce. She no longer wanted to be with him, but one incident in particular brought everything to a head. On August 5, 2016, at 2:30 a.m., Brian hid in the trunk of Denise's SUV. When she opened it, she saw Brian had a gun. He only calmed down when Denise promised to stay with him. Denise went straight to the police to file a kidnapping report. When Brian was arrested and questioned in relation to the kidnapping report Denise filed, he was asked a number of details in relation to Mike's disappearance. He confessed that the day Mike was reported missing, December 16th, he was with him on the lake and he knew exactly what happened to him. He shot him. Prosecutors offered a plea deal to Brian. They believed Denise was involved in Mike's death and knew that there would be little chance of a conviction without Brian's testimony against her due to lack of evidence. Brian accepted the plea agreement in exchange for immunity in relation to Mike's murder on the basis that he would testify at Denise's trial. As a result of the deal, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but that sentence was for the kidnapping charge. He led police to where Mike's body was. His body was found where Brian said it would be. It was along the shores of Carr Lake in Leon County, and he had been shot in the head. Denise Williams was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and being an accessory after the fact. It was the prosecution's case that Mike was shot and killed on the lake on December 16, 2000. But while it was their case that Brian was the person who actually shot Mike, they told the jury that the shooting was the result of a plan concocted by both Brian and Denise. It was the prosecution's case that Brian and Denise were having an affair at the time and wanted Mike dead so that they could be together and collect almost $2 million in life insurance money. The court heard that Denise and Mike were high school sweethearts and were friends with another couple, also high school sweethearts, Kathy and Brian Winchester. Despite Denise and Brian being married to different people, they began an affair, and it was the prosecution's case that affair resulted in Mikey's murder. Brian was the main witness for the prosecution. He told the court that his affair with Denise began at a Sister Hassel concert in 1997. He testified that when Hassel concert in 1997, he testified that when Kathy and Mike were outside the venue parking the car, he was inside the venue with Denise and they kissed. That was the beginning of an affair that continued for a number of years. They went on vacation a number of times together, met for lunch when they were at work, and went to each other's homes when there was nobody else home. Brian testified that the idea to kill Mike came to him one day when he was out on a hunting trip with him. Mike fell into a mud hole and Brian helped him to get out. He told Denise about it and said that if he wasn't there to help, Brian would not have made it out as the ground had collapsed beneath him and began to pull his body down like quicksand. And if Brian had not witnessed it or helped him, nobody would have known what happened to Mike. According to Brian, that conversation was the beginning of a number of conversations that he had with Denise about different ways they could get rid of Mike. Brian testified that Denise did not want a divorce due to personal beliefs and did not want to share custody of her daughter with Mike. He testified that they thought of different ways to kill Mike, and in a way that would allow them to collect the insurance money. Brian told the court that they spoke about Mike being involved in a possible boating accident. The week prior to the actual murder, Denise got cold feet and didn't want to go through with it. But a week later, on December 16th, Brian told the court that she encouraged Mike to go hunting that day. Brian testified that that day he met Mike near the lake and told him he had a special spot where they could go to. When they were out on the lake and when Mike stood up, Brian pushed him overboard. The plan was for Brian to push Mike off the boat and Mike would drown. But Mike didn't drown. He managed to grab hold of a tree stump. He stripped off his own heavy waders and hunting jacket to try to save himself and asked Brian to help. Brian went to the stump, took out his gun and shot Mike in the face. He shot him at 3 feet with a 12-gauge shotgun. Brian removed Mike's body from the lake and put his body in his car and drove back home with Mike's body beneath a tarp. He left Mike's boat on the lake so that police would think there had been an accident on the lake. That same morning, December 16th, Brian drove to a hunting spot he knew well at the edge of Carr Lake, with Mike's body still under the tarp, and stopped at Walmart on the way. He purchased a shovel and weights. When he got to Carr Lake, he found a mud hole where he hid Mike's body. He used the weights to hold down Mike's body. Brian and Denise kept their affair a secret after Mike was reported missing. They dated other people to try to avoid detection, but shortly afterwards, Brian and Kathy divorced. In 2005, he married Denise. Brian testified that they were paranoid after they got married and believed they were being watched. When he was called in for questioning, when Mike's case was reopened, it was the beginning of the end. It became quite clear to me from that interview that they were suspicious of what happened, and not only that, they were suspicious of me and Denise. The court heard that Denise collected $1,750,000 from Mike's life insurance policies. One of the policies had been written by Brian himself in his capacity as an insurance agent. The jury was shown a document that showed Denise filed an insurance claim just 19 days after her husband went missing. The jury also heard recorded calls between Kathy and Denise, where Kathy accused her of being involved in Mike's murder. Denise changed the conversation, but the prosecution told the jury to pay attention to the fact that she did not deny it. It's not what she said, it's what she doesn't say. The prosecution asked the jury to use their common sense when making their decision on her guilt or innocence. It was the defense's case that Denise had nothing to do with Brian's plan to kill Mike, and it was Brian and Brian alone who both made the decision to kill and killed Mike. Denise's lawyer, Philip Padovano, told the jury that the only person to accuse Denise of conspiring to kill Mike was Brian. He reminded the jury that he was a confessed killer and a convicted kidnapper and has every motive to lie to you. Philip told the jury that the issue they would have to decide is whether or not they believed Brian. They did. After less than a day of deliberations, they found Denise guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and being an accessory after the fact. Denise was sentenced to life in prison. Denise appealed her conviction, and an appeals court reversed her conviction on the first-degree murder charge. While under Florida law, defendants can be charged with a crime even though they were not actually or constructively present at the commission of such offense. They overturned that part of the verdict on the basis that the state failed to produce competent and substantial evidence to prove that Denise was a principal to murder under state law. Her only ostensibly culpable conduct, e.g., consideration of ways to kill Mike, development of an alibi, agreeing to encourage Mike to go hunting with Brian, did not constitute commanding or impelling Brian to commit the murder or the assisting or encouraging of Brian at the time he actually was committing the offense. Essentially, the court ruled that the state failed to prove that Denise helped Brian commit the crime. They believed her involvement in the discussions prior to the murder and the fact she urged Mike to go hunting the day he was killed was not enough to meet the high bar required to prove she was a principal and as much to blame as Brian was. Because Denise did not do or say anything to aid or abet Brian in the murder of Mike, as those terms originally were understood to mean, and she did not counsel, hire, or procure Mike's murder beforehand, i.e., she did not get the ball rolling. We reverse her conviction as a principal to first-degree murder. Her conviction on another charge, the conviction for conspiracy to commit murder, was upheld, which meant that the sentence for that portion of the crime would remain intact and Denise would have to serve the 30-year prison sentence. Mike's mother, Cheryl, was distraught when she heard the news. "I am sick. I am literally ill. It's like nobody is responsible for Mike's murder." Kanai Kijima was born on November 27, 1974, in Nakashibutsu, Japan. She was the oldest of 4 siblings. While her relatives' names are not publicly known, it is revealed that her father worked as a notary public and her mother was a piano teacher. Kanai's parents hailed from affluent families and aimed to create a nurturing environment for their children, ensuring they had everything necessary as they grew. As the firstborn, Kanai received particularly special attention. Motivated by her mother's love for music, she dedicated countless hours to developing her piano skills. Kanai refined her technique, and her talent quickly became evident. She performed recitals on various stages and took part in esteemed competitions. However, music wasn't her only passion. By the age of 9, she had already mastered cooking. And this quality, according to her mother, boded well for her future as a wife. However, in order to raise a decent generation, her father imposed strict discipline at home, including limiting access to television. In addition, he gave them virtually no money for personal expenses. Hannah easily coped with the first harsh parental rules, was active and an excellent student. However, the problem of limited access to money was much harder for her to cope with. The girl was prone to luxury and wastefulness. Her father's strictness seemed unbearable to her, and soon she gave in to her instincts. In high school, she learned that her father kept $21,000 in cash at home and embezzled this money, which she then spent on clothes and handbags exclusive brands. As soon as her father found out, he punished Kanai by reducing her allowance. But contrary to her father's wishes, the girl did not regret it. But on the contrary, she craved even more money. This is how she got into the intriguing world of dating. Gaining courage, Kanai began to offer her company to older men in exchange for generous monetary rewards. In this context, she entered into a relationship with a man in his 40th, whose identity is unknown. Under his influence, Kanai stole the bank book of one of her classmates. The two of them then withdrew about $80,000 from it. When authorities discovered them, they were arrested and molested in court. But because Kanai was still a minor, she received probation. Despite this, she maintained an excellent academic record and graduated from high school. After that, she decided to move to Tokyo and enroll in the Faculty of Economics. However, Kanai's interest in studying disappeared almost immediately, and she dropped out of college. Nevertheless, the girl realized that the city fascinated her and did not want to leave. To make ends meet, she took several temporary and unstable jobs. One of them was working as a waitress at a fast food restaurant. The long hours, the harsh environment, and the low pay kept her busy. She constantly worried about how to pay the rent for the apartment, which she hated because it was very modest. It was only a matter of time before Kenya acquired a new nefarious habit. She would walk into a store and pretend to be a regular customer and steal cosmetics, books, and even money. Although she was caught several times, she managed to avoid arrest. These occasional thefts were not enough for the standard of living she aspired to. It was then that Kenya quit her job and decided to go to an escort club. These establishments offered services ranging from conversation and social gatherings to more intimate companionship. Clients were able to choose a woman based on the information provided, but with a height of 5 feet and a weight of 105 kilograms, Kenya did not fit into the accepted standards of beauty. She did not attract much attention at first, but that all changed when she met a pimp named Takeuchi, who became her mentor. He taught her how to satisfy a man, inspired her to create an entire marketing strategy, and told her that she needed middle-aged or older men with low self-esteem and no inclination to desire the women they really wanted. After realizing the value of her own skills and virtues, Kenya learned how to make emotional connections with her partners. She discovered that kindness and consideration fostered not only attention but also appreciation. Kenny became an expert in the art of seduction, skilled at reading people and understanding what they want. She discovered a new, unprecedented power within herself. At that time, Kenny took the pseudonym Sakiro and under it made up the story that her father was a professor at the prestigious Tokyo University, the most elite educational institution in the country. On other occasions, she posed as either a nurse, a therapist, or a famous chef. All of these fictionalized stories created a captivating image. In this new role, one of the clients was Sadao Fukuyama. They met in February 2001 in a bar, and their communication was so intense that within 2 weeks, they became lovers. But not only that, the man, previously characterized by his frugality and careful spending, made the mistake of trusting her. Kenny shamelessly took advantage of this. To begin with, she made up a story about the death of her parents in an airplane crash and told him that she could not pay the tuition at the music school in Boston, where she supposedly studied. Sadao promised to take care of all the expenses, and she in turn traveled from the US once a month to meet with him. The man looked forward to these visits, elegantly dressed and in love with the woman he thought was his fiancée. Kenya took the opportunity to empty most of his savings. A few years later, realizing that she had already exhausted all of Sato's financial resources, Kenya put an end to their relationship. Cunning and manipulative, she left no trace that would allow her to be discovered when the man suspected he was the victim of a hoax and tried to report her. The evidence was insufficient to prosecute the case. A few months afterward, in August 2007, Sadao was late for work. Concerned, One of his co-workers went to his home and, upon entering, found him dead in the shower. When the news became public, Kania transferred $50,000 of her ex-fiancé's funds into her bank account. Since the police were never able to determine the cause of death, the case was filed as a domestic accident. In 2008, Kania became interested in the development of the internet in Japan, and after analyzing the obvious advantages of the virtual world, she decided to change her strategy. She created a profile on the main local social networks dedicated to finding a partner under the pseudonym Sakura. In her description, she made it clear that she was looking for a serious relationship to start a family. Kanio was well aware of the characteristics and needs of her potential victims. She knew that they were mostly men with high work and social pressures, high incomes, and emptiness in their souls. Moreover, her strategy was to adapt to the situation and change arbitrarily depending on the preferences of her interlocutors. In this sense, Kania sometimes presented herself as a young woman looking for true love, a talented penis, or a pet store owner with a passion for cooking. It didn't take her long to become a real virtual celebrity. Especially her profile was liked by mature and elderly men who wanted to give a worthy meaning to their old age. One of those who fell in love with Connie was Takao Terada, a 53-year-old systems engineer who lived in a suburb of Tokyo. Since his daily life was limited to commuting home from work and the only people he socialized with were his mother and sister, in February 2008, Takao decided to try to meet someone online. 2 months later, Kania sent him an invitation to chat and expressed hope for a future marriage, but first she asked for financial help to cover some expenses. At the same time, Kania posed as a nurse and caregiver for the elderly, answering ads posted on the internet. Kenzo Ando, 80, lived in Noda City, Chiba Prefecture. Although his income was low, he came from a respected family, and his father was a famous artist from whom he inherited valuable works. In addition, Kenzo suffered from some health problems. On their first communication, Kania sent him a carefully retouched photograph that barely showed a part of her body. Kenzo was impressed and hired her as his caregiver and cook. Kania not only cooked a special meal for him, but was willing to do anything to please him. In this way, she won his loyalty and appreciation. After a month, Kania approached Kent for a loan, saying that the money was needed to pay for her university fees. Without a moment's hesitation, he handed over all his savings to her. At the same time, she was defrauding other men. In all cases, their names have not been made public, but it is known that their ages range from 40 to 50 years old. At the time when Takao was dreaming of a life together, Connie already had her own plan, and it was quite different. After buying electric stoves online, she arranged to meet him at his house and took sleeping pills with him before the day. After cooking dinner for both of them, she dissolved a few pills in the food. A few minutes later, Takao passed out. Kania dragged him into his room, closed all the doors and windows, set up the stoves, put charcoal on them, and turned them on. Before leaving, she transferred $121,000 from Takao's account to her own bank account. She also took her house keys and computer. 5 days later, on February 4th, 2009, Takao's supervisor came to his home to see if everything was okay. Receiving no response, he contacted the local authorities and Takao's lifeless body was found. After analyzing the call history, investigators discovered that Yoshiyuki only had his mother, sister, and Kanaya under the alias Sakura on his contact list. When officers contacted Kanaya, she reported that Yoshiyuki was emotionally unstable and had likely passed away after experiencing heartache over her rejection of his proposal. Since there were no signs of violence, this version seemed logical to the police. And as a result, the investigation was not continued. After coming out of the coma, Kenzo returned home. On the evening of May 15, 2009, Connie visited him, sat with him as usual, and busied herself with cooking dinner. But this time, she added a special ingredient to his meal, sedatives. Once Kenzo fell asleep, she locked him in his room and repeated the procedure with the electric stoves as she had done with her other victims. Before leaving, she accessed Kenzo's bank account and transferred $13,000 to her own. This time, one of the electric stoves caught fire, and the flames engulfed the entire house. Kanzu died instantly from the fatal burns. A subsequent autopsy revealed that the man had consumed an unusual amount of sleeping pills, although he had never used such drugs before. Despite this, authorities ruled his death an accident. In the meantime, Kenny continued to blog, seeking out new victims online. In July 2009, Izuki Uide stumbled upon her account and, unable to resist her charms, sent her a message. Izuki was a 41-year-old bachelor who earned income from renting out the family property and was very close to his mother, who lived in Fujima. Hani introduced herself to him as a graduate student, and they started chatting. 2 days after meeting, they met and their relationship grew rapidly. They announced their engagement and began making plans for a wedding. As part of the prenuptial agreement, Kenny asked Izuki to wire $30,000 to pay for her graduate school tuition. On August 5, 2009, they took a trip to Fujima, where they planned to spend 3 days. It was a particularly important date for them, and Connie was preparing a fancy dinner to celebrate. Unbeknownst to Izuki, she had added sleeping pills to his food. Upon arriving in Fujima, when they pulled into the parking lot, the sleeping pills began to take effect on Izayuki, and he fell asleep. Connie left him in the car, turned on the electric charcoal stove, and left. She forgot to leave her keys in the car, and a surveillance camera recorded her leaving. After that, Kenny stole $35,000 from Eisuki's account. Police initially thought that Eisuki left his life voluntarily, but when they discovered his car keys were missing and found no note explaining his actions, suspicions began to mount. Analysis of his blog also indicated that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. When police gained access to the surveillance footage, they were able to expose Kanye's return. However, the lack of additional cameras prevented important evidence from being uncovered. A thorough investigation began focusing on Connie. Then, when Eisuki's computer was analyzed, it was revealed how they met. When investigators approached Connie, she stated that she had met Eisuki the day before she left him alone. She also speculated that after she left, the man might have done something to get away with it. But despite Kanai's statement, the police decided to launch a thorough investigation, gathering information on all the deaths and fraud cases that linked her to those involved. On September 15, 2009, Kanai again made contact with another 43-year-old man on a virtual platform. However, his name remained unknown in this case. The girl posed as an American student studying cooking in Japan. She also led one to believe that she had family problems and financial difficulties in paying her tuition fees. Finally, Kanye informed him that she was willing to give up everything, including her studies, to be with him. Next day, her lover sent her $17,000. A few days later, Kanye moved into his house. In doing so, she purchased 2 electric stoves. She then cut all the fire alarm wires in the house. Kanye's plan was thwarted when on September 23, 2009, the fiancé's sister arrived at the residence with the idea of staying for a few days. The girl immediately became suspicious of her new sister-in-law and tried to convince her brother not to continue the relationship. The case worsened when he told her about the strange circumstances of acquaintance and the money he lent her. The sister then decided to follow her intuition and told the police everything she knew. On September 25th, police officers arrived at the residence and arrested Kania on fraud charges. When they searched the room, they found that all of the alarm devices had been disabled, indicating that the girl was about to perform a characteristic procedure. The search also uncovered various medications, including several classes of drowsy and sedative medications. In addition, investigators found all online purchases of stoves on her computer. This evidence provided a direct link to previous cases, thus making her the prime suspect in Yoshiyuki's death. In January 2010, as the investigation into the unusual deaths continue, Kenny was charged with multiple counts of fraud. A month later, she was charged with murder, specifically in the death of Takao. Although an autopsy was never performed in that case, the charge was based on a lack of clear evidence of the cause of death, leading to an unusual situation. During the trial, she pleaded not guilty, claiming that their deaths were accidental or a personal decision by the men. This was consistent with the strategy of her defense, which sought an acquittal, citing a lack of hard evidence. In the absence of such direct evidence, as well as witnesses and confessions, the prosecution emphasized the importance of circumstantial evidence, such as her presence with the victims before their deaths and the similarity of the causes of death. All tests on the body showed that the men had consumed a drug that was also found in Kanya's possession. The prosecution also said that the girl received large loans from her 3 victims and killed them to avoid paying back the money. According to prosecutors, Kanya used charcoal from electric stoves to poison the 3 victims to confuse authority, as death by poisoning is a common way of passing away in Japan. Finally, on April 13, 2012, a jury found Kenny guilty of murdering the 3 men and sentenced her to death. Doomed to the death penalty, Kenny continued to blog. In it, she continued to talk about her experiences and the fame she gained, even financial support from some fans willing to improve her living conditions. Incredibly, one of her fans who gave her financial support ended up marrying Kenny. This happened in 2015, and the man was reportedly around 60 years old. However, after an accident, he became disabled, making it impossible for him to continue supporting her financially. Kanya then divorced him. Kanya also used her time behind bars to write her memoirs, which were then published weekly in a women's magazine. At the same time, she published an autobiographical novel, Praise. 100 days after her divorce, Kanya married again, this time to a real estate entrepreneur. But after a few months, they divorced. In 2018, Kanya decided to marry again. And in this case, the chosen one was a 40-year-old man who worked at the publishing house responsible for publishing her book. While awaiting her execution, Kanye continued to lead an active and controversial life, generating both admiration and condemnation. Sophie Lyon was born in France in 1996. When she was quite young, her parents divorced and her mother remarried, resulting in another child. Sophie grew up in the countryside east of Paris with her mother, stepfather, younger brother, and older stepsister. She was a simple, quiet, and shy girl who preferred to avoid social interactions, had few friends, and often struggled to communicate even with her own family. Her mother noted that she frequently tried to engage Sophie in conversation, asking about her day and what she learned at school. However, Sophie mostly replied with short phrases or one-word answers. Although there were rare moments when she shared more about her daily experiences and feelings, they were infrequent. Nevertheless, Sophie connected very well with other children. She enjoyed their company and maintained strong relationships with them. She seemed happy, and it was evident that this was her favorite thing to do. So after finishing middle and high school, Sophie studied early childhood education, hoping to find work related to children. She started looking for such opportunities, but couldn't find anything she liked or that was specifically related to children. So, Sophie began working as a cashier in a supermarket because she needed to financially support her family. She didn't want to remain unemployed, and while she was searching for an opportunity to do what she truly enjoyed, she thought it was a good option. After some time, she found a job listing thanks to a friend. A family in London was looking for a nanny who spoke French to look after their 2 young children, a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. The couple consisted of Sabrina Kadir and Wissam Majuni, whom everyone called Sam. Sabrina was involved in the fashion world in London and worked as a makeup artist for celebrities. Sam, on the other hand, had been a financial analyst at a bank but had already quit his job by the time they sought a nanny. He had used his savings to buy 2 apartments that the family rented out. They lived in a prestigious area of London, and their financial situation was very good, maintaining a high standard of living. Sophie saw this as the perfect job. She would practice her English, which she had been studying, and take care of 2 children, which was what she wanted to do. At first, her mother didn't want to let her go, saying it wasn't a good idea to travel far to a foreign country with strangers. However, Sophie's determination was so great that her parents eventually agreed to let her take the job. In January 2016, when Sophie was only 20 years old, she arrived in London. In the first months of her stay in London and throughout the year 2016, Sophie was very content with this family and was happy with the children. Neighbors living nearby said they saw in her a girl who was very dedicated to her work. Of course, in London, she had very little social life. There were many nannies who would get together on weekends to socialize. They also interacted with each other when they took the children to the park or school. But Sophie always kept her distance. She was very engrossed in her work. Sophie was supposed to return home to France in September 2017. But in May 2017, she wrote a letter to her mother stating that she was no longer happy with the family she worked for. According to Sophie, Sabrina accused her of stealing from her, reduced her salary, didn't allow her to go anywhere, and didn't give her the allotted time off. So Sophie's mother bought her a plane ticket and sent it to her, but Sophie didn't use the ticket. For the next few weeks, almost nothing was heard from Sophie, although in previous months, she had been very communicative with her family, sending postcards, letters, and emails. Over time, these messages became less frequent, and her parents became very worried about her. On Wednesday, September 20th, 2017, a barbecue was being prepared in the backyard of Sabrina and Sam's house. The problem with this barbecue was that the smell began to become quite strange, and moreover, the smoke coming from the family's garden was too strong. Some neighbors knocked on the door and found Sam alone. He said he was grilling chicken and lamb and assured them not to worry because there was always too much smoke when he barbecued, as he didn't know how to use it properly. However, one of the neighbors didn't believe this and called the fire department. Everyone was afraid that the fire would spread to neighboring houses or that someone would be poisoned by the smoke. When the firefighters arrived, they went inside and asked Sam what he was doing. One of the photos showed that he was grilling chicken. The firefighters found it very strange that such strong smoke was coming from chicken and lamb, so they examined the remains on the grill. When they looked closely, they saw fingers and what seemed to be a nose. They called the police, and these bones turned out to be human remains. At that moment, Sam was taken into custody and sent to the police station. As he was being transported, more law enforcement personnel arrived. The street was completely blocked, and the neighbors started wondering what could have happened. Suddenly, the police brought out something that looked like a body covered with tarpaulin from the garden. A few days later, it was confirmed that it was the body of Sophie Lyon, who was 21 years old at the time. Sam and Sabrina were both arrested, and the months of torture and suffering that the young Frenchwoman had endured in this couple's home were revealed. As usual, a forensic examination was conducted to determine the cause of death, the day of death, and what had really happened to Sophie. Initially, it was assumed to be murder, a conclusion confirmed by the examination. Sophie had several fractures of the sternum, ribs, clavicle, and jaw, and these fractures were several days old. Unfortunately, the exact cause of Sophie's death couldn't be determined 100% because her body had been severely burned. It was also impossible to determine the day of her death. It didn't take much effort to understand that Sam and Sabrina were clearly responsible for her death. Now, it was necessary to find out what had happened and how it had occurred in order to begin the legal process and bring justice to Sophie, who deserved it. Following the results of the forensic examination, 2 days after the discovery of the body, Sabrina and her husband Sam were charged with the murder of Sophie Lyon. The trial revealed much about the conditions in which Sophie had lived in her last few months in London. Much attention was paid to Sabrina's personality. Sabrina, like Sophie, started her career as a nanny. Afterward, she began working as a makeup artist and became involved in the fashion world in London, working with celebrities. She had a son with the singer Mark Walton, who was a member of a boy band at the time. They fell in love, dated, and had a son, Sabrina's older child, whom Sophie took care of. In 2013, their relationship ended, and they broke up. Mark told Sabrina that he didn't want anything to do with her, which led to a complete change in Sabrina's personality. According to several people who knew her since she started dating Mark, she became very unstable, behaved strangely, had several episodes of anger, and often became angry with people without any apparent reason. Sabrina also began to stalk Mark, knowing where he was, calling him constantly, and wanting to remain part of his life. But he repeatedly rejected her. While she was still obsessed with Mark, she began a relationship with Sam. Sam and Sabrina had known each other for many years, and after a few months of their relationship, Sabrina became pregnant. She moved into Sam's apartment, where their daughter was born and where Sophie lived later. As the girl grew up a bit, they decided to hire a nanny to help them. Externally, Sabrina and Sam's life seemed perfect, but in reality, they had many problems. As I mentioned earlier, Sam worked as a financial analyst at a bank. He quit his job because Sabrina told him that he spent too much time at work and there was not enough time for the family. However, when Sam left his job, their income apparently became less than what Sabrina was used to. She wanted to go to dinners with celebrity, buy expensive dresses, and while she could afford a relatively luxurious life thanks to her own work, she wanted more and more. Furthermore, for many years, she continued to pursue Mark. Sabrina had reached the point where she had concocted the idea that her ex, Mark Walton, was a child abuser, an exploiter of people, and just a very bad person in general. Clearly, she had no evidence of any of this, and all the accusations were deemed false. In 2017, Mark Walton decided to move from London to the USA. When Sabrina found out about this, she became very angry. He was in America and she was in London, and she could no longer control him, didn't know where he was or who he was with. Sabrina couldn't keep tabs on him, couldn't stalk him, or call him like she had done for the past few years. And so, she began venting all her anger on Sophie. At first, Sabrina accused her of things like stealing from the house. She also told her that she didn't do things on time, that she cooked poorly, that she was always late picking up the kids from school. Anything just to have an excuse to treat her poorly and yell at her. Soon, the verbal insults escalated into physical violence. It was revealed that not only Sabrina, but also Sam had repeatedly beaten Sophie. They kicked her, slapped her, beat her with cords, and the girl began to suffer greatly. In addition, they deprived her of food, didn't allow her to bathe, and even cut her salary. According to several people who had seen Sophie in recent months, she always wore the same clothes, was very unkempt, didn't maintain hygiene, all because these people didn't give her the opportunity to live a normal life. Sophie's free time was also restricted, and to some extent, she was locked in the house, only going out to take the kids to school, pick them up, take them to sports classes, and do shopping for the family. After that, she was completely isolated from the world. Sabrina even repeatedly prohibited her from talking to her family. The court presented recordings that help confirm this. On these recordings, made with Sam and Sabrina's mobile devices, you can hear them verbally abusing Sophie, as well as physically assaulting her.
Imagine yourself every day in a cage like an animal. You will not go back to France until you've told me the truth. I'm going to spoil your life as you have spoiled mine. I'm going to kill you, okay? Be quick!
You better know that we will not let you go back until we know the whole truth. Nothing but the truth.
In addition to the audio recordings, photos were found on all the family's electronic devices, computers and phones, showing how Sophie changed over time, becoming thinner and more emaciated. She was already quite slim before, but in this last photo that you are now seeing on your screens, she looked very awful. Obviously, Sophie was not healthy, neither physically nor emotionally. According to the girl's mother, when she saw her daughter's photo, it reminded her of people who had been in concentration camps. Sophie endured several months of torture, but she remained silent out of fear of Sabrina, as her mother claimed that she had repeatedly threatened her. The woman threatened to send her to prison, harm her parents, and much more. She even claimed that Sophie had a secret relationship with Mark Walton, and that she let him into the house when no one was there. Sabrina wanted so badly to destroy her ex-partner that she forced Sophie to write a letter in which she allegedly confessed to having a secret relationship with Mark Walton. And all of this happened because he made her do it and promised her roles in movies and TV series in exchange for a sexual relationship. Obviously, this was impossible. Mark Walton didn't even know about Sophie's existence and moved several months after her arrival in London. As I mentioned earlier, the exact date of Sophie's death was not known from the autopsy results. But thanks to the investigation and what was said in court, it became somewhat clear when this happened. According to the prosecution's version, it was the evening of September 19th. Several surveillance cameras captured Sabrina and Sam on September 20th when the body was found by the barbecue. You can see Sam taking the children to school that morning. Then, after classes, Sabrina took them to a small playground. It seemed like she deliberately delayed coming home. Sam also went to the grocery store to do some shopping. Sophie usually took care of all these tasks. That's why they hired her. Therefore, prosecutors believe that Sophie was already dead at that time. It can also be assumed that there was a certain premeditation in the murder. Sabrina was texting one of her friends, and this friend asked her if Sophie had any friends who would be willing to work for her, cook, walk the dogs, do house cleaning, and spend time with her daughter. Sabrina replied that Sophie no longer worked for them and hinted in the message that things had not ended well. This happened on September 15th, 5 days before the police arrested Sabrina and her husband. Regarding their testimonies, they both accused each other. Sabrina told the story that on the night of September 19th, she went to sleep. Sam was arguing with Sophie because she hadn't prepared dinner the way he wanted and had done it wrong. Sabrina went to sleep and didn't hear anything more about the argument. According to her, when she woke up in the middle of the night, she heard noise in the bathroom. It was Sam drowning Sophie. Sabrina told the authorities that she couldn't save the girl because when she entered the bathroom, Sophie was already almost dead. Sam told the same story, but in his version, the person who argued with and drowned Sophie was not him, but Sabrina. They both told the same story, blaming each other. Then, the prosecution brought in a crucial witness, Sabrina and Mark Walton's son, the eldest child in the house. The boy said that on the night of September 19th, he heard Sabrina and Sam arguing with Sophie, and then both of them took her to the bathroom, and he heard the nanny screaming for help. Thanks to this testimony, the prosecution was able to establish that Sophie's death occurred on September 19th, and that Sam and Sabrina drowned her in the bathroom. As I mentioned earlier, although they didn't plan it, Sabrina to some extent already knew that it might happen, which is why she was telling her friends that Sophie no longer worked for them. After reviewing witness testimony, audio recordings, and the case timeline, the jurors were tasked with making a decision. After deliberating for 30 hours, they found Sam and Sabrina guilty of Sophie Lyon's murder and sentenced them to 30 years in prison. Sabrina even penned a so-called farewell letter to Sophie, expressing a wish for her to be in a better place. For Sophie's friends, family, and acquaintances, this gesture felt like a mockery, clearly demonstrating Sabrina's lack of remorse for taking Sophie's life. Information regarding the custody of the two children remains unclear, and it's possible that it was not made public. However, we can only hope they are placed with individuals who love and support them, helping them navigate this difficult period after witnessing their parents' cruel treatment of Sophie. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.